I know it's a work session, but just so I know, I just want to do a quick roll call. Councilmember Christiansen, that's more of a mic check as much as anything. Councilmember Christiansen?
She moved away for a minute.
I'm back.
Okay. Oh, there you are. Okay. Councilmember Shelton, I can see you. Can you mic okay? Councilmember Barnes?
I didn't hear Shelton. I'm here.
Rob, I did not hear you as well. I saw your lips move, but I don't see you that you're muted either. So do you want to respond? Councilmember Shelton, can you hear me okay? Do you want to so we can just verify your mic? Not hearing you. Okay, he's working on it.
Okay. Hey, George, is there a possibility that I can change my name? I can't put my name up there, and I don't want Red Ryder Creative up there.
Yeah, you should be able to hold your cursor right over your Red Ryder, and you'll have the 3 little check marks.
Yeah, it's not doing that this time. I don't know
No,
what the deal is.
it's locked out. Let me re-enable it.
Okay, I was going to say, because I can see it. I'm co-host, so.
So try now. It
Good.
should.
Stop blocking me out, Vendolin. Come on.
Now somebody fix mine too.
There you go.
Mayor, I'm good now, I think.
Yep, gotcha. Thank you. All right, Councilmember Carroll. There we go. Now go ahead and just respond.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, gotcha. Councilmember Taylor
Yes.
on the beach. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you. It is roughly, it's just a couple minutes past 4 o'clock. We are here in a work session. It is May 5th of the year 2020. And pursuant to the COVID-19 federal guidelines, this meeting will be conducted electronically. You may watch the meeting live stream at the referred spot on the agenda. And I would just note that the council members are in various places, perhaps in their home or their offices, along with staff as well. And I am in the mayor's office. And this has become a new normal, and I'm getting quite comfortable with it. So you guys are gonna have to talk me out of this when the time comes. So anyway, we will follow the agenda as outlined. Again, this is just for matters of gaining information and discussion. Item number 1 is discussion on a memorandum of understanding regarding the Lake City Road development. And I'm going to have Sherilyn kind of lead us into this, if you wouldn't, Sherilyn, in the process. And just kind of, I know Buck's on, I can see you here as well, Buck. So, but I'm going to have Sherilyn kind of lead into it.
So this matter came before council once previously. It's a very similar MOU, but there have been a couple of minor changes to the parking section. Those changes really are just providing reference to the city code. It's the position of the applicant that what's being requested in this MOU is actually just referencing to the city code that would otherwise be applied. That this is a unique development. It's in the PC zone. Portions of this otherwise master developed project have kind of been sold off to various developers. So this MOU would really just give a little bit of security and understanding to all the developers in that area as to what the guidelines are for their projects. The city has the shared parking agreement in the city code 175133I. We do allow for shared parking agreements when there's a mixture of commercial and residential. The overall master planned development in this area, the approvals for this particular area require a certain percentage of commercial and a certain percentage of residential. So they would qualify for the shared parking agreement as set out in the city code. The parking standards that are referenced in this MOU are the same, actually they exceed in some aspects the requirements of 17.5.133C6. And in our city code, in that particular section, it indicates that if a development, if the parking standard is not specified in the city code for a particular development, then you revert back to that table, and that table is what you should follow for the parking. The table in the code calls out studio 1.25. Oh, there we go. Vinland's all over it. 1.25 for a studio, 1.5 for a 1-bedroom, and only 2 for a 2-bedroom or more. This MOU would require 2.25. It also throws in that extra layer of requiring 1.8 for the overall parking standard for any residential development. And so really the applicant here is simply asking that this MOU provide a little bit of clarity. In fairness, there is ambiguity in the code as to whether or not this particular table applies to this development. We do specify residential and we do specify commercial in our code. However, this is a PC zone. So with that ambiguity, I believe that that's really what this MOU would do, is kind of clear up some ambiguity in the code. And I think that that's really what the applicant is looking for with this.
What section of the code is this that you're referencing?
This is, the table is 17.5.133.
And what is it like? It says off-street parking, but is it under a subsection or any kind?
So the subsection is C6.
Okay. And is there a parking standard different than like an overall parking number? Like this one has 1.8. Is that specified in the code?
No. That was the 1.8, and Adam, chime in if I misspeak, but the 1.8 was something that from the city's perspective, it felt comfortable with. I should say from the staff perspective.
Okay. All right. You know, seeing that there has been no real structural change to this MOU as opposed to what we had before, it just brought a little more clarity and incorporated the code in the text of this. I'm just going to open it up to questions from the council, myself, to the applicant to just kind of work through this. It will be on we do have it following this meeting. We have a special session that we will be able to make a vote on this. And so there was questions from council before. So Buck, it's good to have you in here with us. Appreciate you being here. And if you would like to add anything that Sherilyn and just add upon that, and then we can open it up and kind of learn and understand this a little bit better.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor, Council, folks, and also staff. I appreciate that we were able to finally do a new version of a face-to-face. Yeah, I think that as we went through the last city council meeting, I was on the outside looking in, and I got to hear the deliberations. And of course, as we got toward the end of it, I was very grateful for the opportunity to sit with you and talk through a couple of the items. I think that's one of the things that we just kind of neglected to communicate in the last pass, was that we were working with existing code to try to make this comfortable, secure, and reasonable. And to further that kind of, I don't like to use the word argument, but discussion. The one thing that's unique about Lake City Row is that by design and through the annexation agreement, we have a connected commercial and residential ratio. And so in order to gain residential density, we're required by agreement to also provide commercial. And so we're unique from all other kinds of development in American Fork. And really, indeed, in most of Utah, this is a pretty unique arrangement that the PC zone sets forward. And so because we, in order to have residential density, we also are providing the commercial density. I think we've always intended that, that a reasonable and responsible approach to shared parking and also a kind of a controllable approach to parking provision for the subdevelopers would be really helpful. Again, a reminder, once they get into their process of doing plans, that becomes very expensive very quickly. And they want to have some assurity that they're designing toward an acceptable goal with parking ratios. So at any rate, to cut to the chase, we just wanted to make sure that we inserted and had the code references in there, and that the basic discussion about why this is an other use, because it is a mixed use, got at least kind of through in the discussion. I have some materials that I've been reviewing over the last couple of weeks that, as far as one of the major questions from a couple of weeks ago was, does shared parking work? And I've pulled some studies that are local. I have the Salt Lake City Code. I have the Orem parking study, and there are many, many others. But if the council is interested in seeing some of the summary items in there, that's something we could certainly go through together. And then I also drew on Google Earth a map showing some of the unique features of Lake City Row, including its context to the very large Utah Valley Business Park that it's adjacent to, and how much of that business park is walkable uniquely from Lake City Row. Here, that's that map. And so everything you see in the turquoise color there represents the approximately 100-acre Utah Valley Business Park. I wasn't able to get the square footage of each building there, but I'm guessing that we're already in excess of 1 million square feet of commercial buildings. And that by the time build out occurs, because some of the Lake City Row parcels are also commercial, by the time build out occurs, we'll probably be toward 1.5 million square feet of commercial. If you take the core structures and draw what the planners call kind of a walkable circle, it's a 1/4 mile is the walkability standard that everybody likes. People are generally willing to walk that far on a routine basis, not twice that far. And so applying that, I basically took a 1/4 mile circle, placed it on each of the major existing buildings, and you can see how the Lake City Row footprint is an extremely walkable situation in American Fork. Hardly anything else in the city gets close to this kind of walkability. And when we look at the other large business parks that have sprung up around Utah Valley, none of them create walkability for a residential population. What that translates into is pretty demonstrable, and that is that that we would expect, and essentially all of the studies would bear it out, that we're going to have a car reduction here because employees of these places are going to find very nearby, very high quality and affordable housing. And so it creates a situation that's synergistic truly, not just between the shared parking areas, but between the land uses. And it creates an opportunity for some of those young families to jettison a car, get rid of a car, and save the $9,000 a year that the extra car costs. That pays the rent for a year for a millennial family. So those are the principles that we work on, and our context is very special for that. And that's in addition to the other protections that we're just trying to put in place with the 1.8 minimum. There's another thing here, which I don't have the controls. Whoever has the controls, could you kind of do a circle right in the middle there around the Twin Lab parking lot? And right there, just kind of circle that parking lot. That area there, we actually a year ago purchased the Twin Lab building and then resold it for essentially no gain in order to obtain a parking easement on the back half of those parking stalls. And so we have a parking easement back there that already that provides a couple hundred car buffer to the project. So we've been thinking long, hard, carefully, and doing very aggressive work to create more than adequate parking in the area. We feel very sure that as the development takes its total final shape, you'll see when the first plans come through from one of our sub-developers. They've developed a big, beautiful walking promenade up the middle of their proposed development, and it walks right in the direction of the business park. So the whole thing has been set up from the get-go to shift the paradigm and to make a more livable, walkable place and a connection to that Utah Valley Business Park. So those are some other details that I wanted to provide in the conversation.
All right. Questions for the applicant? The council?
I was raised significant questions on this last time, and after that meeting, I went out and checked as many as I knew right around this area that I could go through. And I know, Buck, your situation is a little different based on the commercial influence and combining there, but literally in every one of those that I went to, and I'm I have a tendency to exaggerate, but I'm not. In every one of those, there was mass parking in the streets. There was, where they would have red zones. In some, the cars would be piled up right up to that red zone. And I know, Buck, we're always talking about, oh, millennials want to ditch a car, and millennials don't want a mortgage. They want to lease. And we have all these characteristics of millennials. But just being honest, I haven't seen any of those. And every one of these developments that we have around here, yours is different, I admit, because of the commercial. There's parking on top of one another. It's absolutely crackers. And we can go down and we can look at anyone south of State Street in American Fork, on the border of Pleasant Grove and in American Fork. And it is just not the way it's depicted. And I know you're working with an ordinance, we're working with an ordinance, but that's a tough narrative because it just doesn't prove out in anything that I've been able to see. So while that's not necessarily your problem tonight, this is unique, but we continue to have these as a council. We continue to have these, and I'm not a naysayer on many things, but this parking thing is just not right. 1.2, or I know bare minimum is going to be 1.8 with this, but I've just never seen it. I've never seen it work.
Thank you, and I appreciate that observation, and I'm guessing that it's true. I would add a couple other layers of observation, and one is that the COVID situation has absolutely created for residential projects a maximum parking scenario. Everybody's at home, nobody's away, everybody's parked almost at all times, and so that seems to me that it's a little bit as expected. The second layer of analysis I would add to that is that most of these places are really fully, between workplace and residence, are fully automobile dependent. There's not a realistic way, even if you move a half a mile away from Lake City Row, there's not a realistic way to cross those major streets and to walk into a work destination like the Domo campus. We've got that, and it is unique. If the council is interested, I also have from Orem City 2019 a parking study that has an analysis and conclusion from a shared parking arrangement in one of their major developments that would be instructive for a quick glance. Are you interested in seeing that?
I think we have the time. Let's do it real quick, Buck.
Okay, I'm going to request the share screen here. Okay. I don't know who is my. Here we go. You cannot start okay, so somebody has to stop sharing before I can ask. There we go. There's my screen. I'm sharing. Okay, can you see this okay?
Nothing yet. Oh, there we go.
There we go. So you're seeing Google Earth here, and this is just a kind of a quick glance of my analysis. This is what I ran to figure out what walkability looks like from the buildings there. I don't know how the feed is working. It might be a little bit too slow for that, but what I want to show you actually is, tell me if you can see the whole screen okay here when I maximize, okay? Is that showing up just fine?
I see the Salt Lake City, basically their logo.
Okay, Orem City?
Yes.
Okay, try not to get dizzy. I'm going to page down real quick.
Mhm.
There's some recommendations. One of the major recommendations from this 2019 study was to move away from per unit parking in Orem and utilize a per bedroom standard instead, which is in many ways similar to what we're doing. So we're looking for in your code is to use what's actually effectively the hybrid of this concept. What I want to get to is, I apologize, it's highlighted, so we'll find it in a second. Okay.
Is this
This is-
for like a student housing development? What is this for, Buck?
This is citywide. This is an analysis of all of the parking in Orem City. It's a full analysis of their code, of the different land uses, and of some of the opportunities and challenges. And so they ran as part of this an analysis of 345 mixed-use developments to come up with what average vehicle ownership looked like. And of course, some of these will have come from bigger cities, and so they have a little different context. But I want to home in on this piece of the analysis right here, because this happened in Orem City. I'm just going to go ahead and read. I know that you can, but I'm just going to go ahead. So they're talking about adjusting rates, and they say this has been done successfully in Orem using a shared parking agreement in the PD23 zone, currently known as Midtown 360 at 320 South State. The parking requirements for this zone require one parking stall per 250 square feet of GLFA for commercial and office space. That's similar to the requirement in American Fork. In fact, I think it's exactly the same requirement. Incidentally, our commercial will have, instead of 4 unit stalls per 1,000, we'll have 5, because our commercial partners believe that that's what the market likes. And so we'll be creating a larger parking supply with our commercial uses. Continuing, the total number of parking stalls provided for non-residential uses is granted as a base residential density. A minimum of 1.65 parking stalls per unit is provided. So we're looking at 1.8, so we're already above the minimum standard employed there. Here's what their analysis yielded. This was the parking counts at that mixed-use development. With 284 residential units and 50,000 square feet of floor area, Midtown 360 provides 689 parking stalls, equaling 1 parking stall per 250 floor area and roughly 1.7 parking stalls per residential unit. Peak occupancy, peak demand on the day of observation was 381 occupied spaces for a peak occ rate of 55%. And that took place at midnight in the residential areas. And so we can read more. The study is full of all sorts of things, but this was the best analog for a Utah County mixed-use development that has some comparability to what we're doing with actual counts and actual analysis employed. As a result, the study recommended that they basically employ a shared parking arrangement that's structured in the code for mixed-use developments because they can see that there's been a parking oversupply that's rather significant. Okay, so this is an easy thing to find or for me to send, but I wanted to share that piece of analysis with everybody because in the context of mixed use, shared parking really, really works. And all of the cities in the Wasatch Front and beyond who have significant mixed use developments, they all have a shared parking program that's built into it. And many of them, or most of them, also have a per bedroom sort of arrangement for parking calculus. I believe that's what the city code intended to do in the section that we're citing, was to recognize these uses. They're out of the custom. And ours is really a great test fit for that.
This is this kind of, it looks like it was meant for Midtown, that big development right off of State Street.
This piece of analysis connects to that, but the whole entire study is citywide. It's for the whole city of Orem.
Okay. All right.
Hey, Buck, I would like to have a copy of this analysis. I don't know if you can send it to somebody or send it to me.
Yeah, I'll send it. Why don't I send it to David? Is that okay? And then you can
Yep.
distribute it. Okay, I'll do that.
And Buck, out of curiosity, to make sure I understand, the minimum for residential that's dedicated to residential is 1.8, but then there's the shared parking that goes over and beyond that. So let's say that that development does all of a sudden require 2.25 or whatever it is on average per unit. That's where the commercial shared parking agreement allows for that overflow. Is that right?
That is correct. And so it would be 1.8 plus what is, again, legislated to become a shared parking program with the other land uses that we're required to build.
And I'm just curious, what's our current standard throughout the city, like Haymaker and maybe some of those others that Councilmember Taylor looked at? Do we know what the average parking per those would be at?
Adam?
I believe those met the current code. I don't know that those were any kind of reduction.
Okay. And what's the current code at?
2.25 per unit.
Okay. So if we take a look at that, Buck, with the shared parking agreement, what would be the average parking, including the shared parking as the overflow?
Well, thank you. That's a really great question. Even put most simply, with the current parking easement that we have on the Twin Lab property, if we're trying to pick up a quarter car per unit, that's enough parking to pick up the quarter car across 800 units. And so it doesn't take very much. You know, if we have a 100,000 square foot office building and we park it at five parking spaces per thousand, we've got 500 parking units there. So if we're trying to pick up a quarter parking unit across 500 units, that shared parking is incredibly ample. That's 2,000 units gaining a quarter car. And so our context is just really excellent for this kind of an arrangement. And between 1.8 and what we're going to end up with as commercial as required, the project's going to be very, very nicely parked.
So Buck, I have a question. So as we talk about what was the Twin Labs is now it's going to be a protein bar. I did take a tour of that facility. It appeared to me that they were looking to literally go around the clock in that facility. And I don't know if the parking would be stretched in that back parking lot or if they expected that to purge out during the night. But their facility was being ramped up to really meet a high demand. And what I interpreted that to be was they would have a lot of their employee base would come in during the night as well.
Yeah, so when we were working with them, we understood that and we talked about the details of it. And although the details aren't perfectly fresh in my mind, their maximum parking need was, if I recall correctly, it was a little more than half of what the parking area accommodates. And so there was always an excess supply there, which is part of why it was reasonable for us to broker this deal.
So when we talk about the Haymaker thing, and you know what, I don't know why I'm bringing this up because it's in the ordinance and it's the way it's going to be. But when we talk about that extra space, if we use Haymaker as an example, you see them parking all along the streets on both sides. There are probably spaces on the inside that are available for them in that visitor parking area or those demand areas. But the people that I've spoken with is, I can park here on the road and my route to the house that I'm currently living in is much quicker than if I were to park in one of those visitor spots and then walk to the place. So I just park out here on the road because, and that's what I worry about with all of these situations. And I'm one of those obnoxious people now, I feel that I'm becoming, that I don't have a solution, but we're talking about this, and Buck, you've done absolutely everything you were asked to do. So this is not a shot on you, but I am just the biggest pessimist on this because I don't think they're going to park in Twin Labs. I think they're going to park around the houses, that are going to park wherever they can. They're going to park on the street. People just do not seem to be willing to walk. Even this very socially conscious millennial generation, they're just not willing to walk when they're in a hurry. They're busting out the door to get to work, or they want to get inside fast. They've got groceries, whatever it might be. That's why I'm skeptical. Having said that, there's nothing I can do but vote yes on this. You've done everything that's been required on this for this MOU. And I don't know whether I'm talking to the city. I don't know whether I'm talking out loud. It's just not working. Anywhere that I've seen, even with this Orem report, I have not seen an installation where this is accurate. And every report comes out and says this. I went up to Daybreak up in Harriman, went through all of that. There were cars parked too deep behind single car garages illegally in these big areas. And I mean, it's all over. And I'm sorry, I don't know where we're going or where I'm going, but these reports are wonderful, but I just don't find them to be accurate just by watching the practical application. But you've done everything. You've been fantastic. Boom, we'll go forward with this. But it does not prove out to me.
I think Clark brings up a good point, and I think that's the case in a lot of stuff that we look at from a regulatory standpoint as a city or any government entity is if there's no enforcement action behind it, little people are going to have any respect for that, right? I mean, not trying to sidetrack, but take our tree trimming ordinance, for example. If we're not out there proactively doing it, people aren't trimming their trees and things of that nature. So, but coming back to this, is this all part of one big old HOA that would be enforcing these through HOA rules, or how would that look for these parking structures?
Yeah, we would do as we've done with the Twin Lab situation, which is that when we have a shared parking arrangement, we actually record the easement. And so it becomes part of how the properties operate. And unless everybody, including the city, is agreeable to a change, the easement's a recorded easement.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is I've got an employee at my work. She lives down in the Vineyard area, which is just booming with these type of multifamily projects, right? And she's finding exactly what Clark's describing is parking's getting tough. And so she was parked in the visitor parking, which you can only be there, I guess, so many hours out of the day. But because of the COVID thing, she didn't move her vehicle every so often or whatever. And the HOA caught it. So my question is that going to be an enforcement issue there where maybe you have a double parked car in a single, car garage type thing that the HOA will self enforce? Because I would hate to have parking enforcement be a liability of the city.
Okay, I'm clearer on your question. Thank you. The answer is two-pronged. First, each developer with their own development is responsible for that enforcement. It would never fall to the city except on the city street frontages. And so if the city puts some signage out in front that says, 2-hour parking on the city streets, that's one question. But on the sites, that will always be managed by the site owners. Same goes for those parking easements. So this is the second prong. If there's a shared parking design in one of the commercial buildings, then that easement and how it's patrolled or managed, patrolled is not the right word, but policed or managed, that belongs to the commercial office building owner, which will be us. And so part of our deal will be to make sure that the commercial buildings stay up to top-notch standards, that they're looking right, they're attractive, they pull high rents, attract the right kind of companies. And so with that, we won't be allowing any cars to park needlessly for long periods of time. We'll be enforcing that automatically.
And would it be possible to pull back up that map that you had with the red and blue and just show me where the public streets you're anticipating going in would be that potentially, we would be responsible for that enforcement on?
Yes. Can you all see my screen again? I'm pulling Google Earth back up.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to forgive all of my red lines that are a little bit ugly to look at. Okay. So I'm going to just turn the property off except for the new roads. Okay. So here are this is the way the property is right now. And the roads that are required to be constructed by the development as the development goes on are these right here. Okay, and so that's the new network of city streets. And the main one, which of course is 620 South, it's a 5-lane arterial. I believe that our full design for that does not include on-street parking. So you would never see on-street parking as a part of the challenge there. However, I believe that 860 East does allow on-street parking by design, by code and everything else, and Quality Drive as well, okay? And so these two streets here would have a combination of uses, including bus stops and potentially on-street parking.
Okay.
Those design questions and approvals also belong to the city, not to us.
Okay, thank you.
All right. You know, I just want to go back to maybe the question by Councilmember Taylor in feeling that maybe perhaps that there needs to be a vote, that he has to vote for this. Maybe you can clarify that for me a little bit, Sherilyn, that is this something that it does meet the code, therefore we have to abide by it?
I would say that this is where there's some ambiguity. The argument that Buck makes is that this is in the PC zone, and his annexation agreement, or the annexation agreement for this property, is unlike something that's already in our code. So it has restriction on the amount of residential and the amount of, or requirements for the amount of residential and the amount of commercial in this annexed area. It's the argument, his argument, that pushes us into this use not specifically listed, and therefore this table should govern. I think in honesty, there's the argument that can be made on the other side that no, our code does govern how many residential unit, or does have a number for residential units, and it does have a parking requirement for commercial. That the argument of use not specifically listed, well, these uses that are contemplated in this zone are specifically listed. I say that there's ambiguity because this PC zone and this restriction that we put into the annexation agreement isn't something that's contemplated in our code. So there can be an argument that this parking table should apply. Typically, when there's ambiguity, we side with the applicant. And so if it's kind of a 50-50 call, the applicant's going to get the benefit of the doubt. And so for that reason, I think that his argument is a strong argument to make because there is that ambiguity there. Ultimately, Mayor, I've talked with Adam about cleaning this up one way or another, depending on the direction of Planning Commission and Council, to make sure that this doesn't come up in the future, and that whatever the clear direction of Council is, or the clear direction of Planning Commission, because ultimately Planning Commission is kind of the first recommending body for parking. And just so Council is aware, this MOU did go before the Planning Commission, and they did recommend approval of this parking because it was consistent with the table, and the use was something that wasn't necessarily straightforward in our code.
I appreciate that comment and bringing that up. We say the word ambiguity, and that's the first thing that I usually go to is, okay, how do we clear that up? So I'm glad to hear you guys are working on that and seeing what we can do to clean that up. So that's great. The only thing I wonder about is what's the legal ramifications of an MOU? It's not something I see very often. In fact, I think this is the first time I've seen it as a council member on memory. We may have done one in the past. Usually see like developer agreements and stuff like that are more binding in my mind.
Been an MOU with that school in Harriman for the baseball park.
Yeah.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is, out of the 9 years, this last 6 months is the only time I've really seen this. We've had the one down there on around the TOD area that had the MOU for the special tax stuff that they were looking to do, and then that baseball one. But is this the best option to go here? Because it's kind of like this wink, wink, nod, nod, non-binding, but yes, go ahead. We're going to commit to this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say typically we would want to go the route of a development agreement. There's a lot of complexities with this project that make a development agreement near impossible, to be honest with you, at this point. There's a lot of other things. When you do a development agreement, you want to put everything into one agreement. And this development isn't quite at that point. And there's also been several properties that have been sold off. And so the MOU really is the best option right now. I would say it's a little bit more than kind of a nudge and a wink with this particular MOU. It's really the approval of this MOU is a concession that we recognize that there's some ambiguity, and we're kind of conceding that this table should govern. There's always the argument on the other end of it. We could, if the city chooses and says, no, we don't like this MOU, and we want to look at whether or not that ambiguity gets us to the point where we have to approve it or not approve the table or the use of that table, we can look at that and we can certainly analyze that a little bit more. This MOU really is saying to these developers, we acknowledge that this table should govern, but rather than get in a back and forth legal battle of which parking standard governs, they're willing to kind of give in a little bit and say, okay, we're going to go with the 1.8 and we'll give you the 2.25 on your 2 or more units. In exchange, the city's saying, okay, we're not going to fight this. We're willing to go ahead and run with this table. So in an ideal world, would a development agreement be best? Yeah, probably. But in this particular case, the development agreement isn't really possible. And this MOU would, in my opinion, give the developers what they need to move forward, understanding that the city is recognizing this table as kind of that governing parking structure.
And is it just the parking, or was there other items inside this MOU that were important as well?
There are other pieces to this MOU. Those other pieces were things that we just make sure everybody understood kind of where each side was coming from.
Yeah, we had a whole bunch of, just as the months rolled on, we had a lot of conversations and a lot of little things that distilled into common understanding between us and the city, and they weren't documented anywhere. And so this also serves just to document those things and to tie up the loose ends to make sure things didn't get lost in the mix.
And then just one more question is we've looked at shared parking down there with, the Woodbury project and what they were looking at. One big thing for me is that it basically has got to be in perpetuity, right? Because if all of a sudden you pull away that commercial, then you end up with even worse of a situation than a project like the Haymaker, because now you're at 1.8 versus the 2.25. So at what point do we start addressing some of those issues? Is that in a development agreement somewhere down the road that we would address that?
Yeah, so
oh, go ahead, Buck.
Oh, I was just going to say that my approach to that would have been that as we do each commercial site plan and it goes through its process, that the site plan would first show or prove to the city how the parking had been put forward to be actually usable as a shared parking amenity. And so that would become part of how the commercial sites are approved, making sure that issue and need is addressed. And so then, as the shared parking arrangements come in, basically, as a project is approved, it might be as simple as requiring the shared parking agreement or part of the parcel to be recorded. So,
and that would then be good into perpetuity between buyer and seller. That would always be shared parking.
Yeah, so it would be a recorded easement.
Perfect. Is that something we need to add in here as each project is coming in to make sure that's added into those agreements?
We reference it loosely in the first parking bullet point, which is that the applicant shall submit a shared parking deal. And so that's how we intended to do it. If
Okay.
you want it to be more specific, I don't think it would hurt to add a sentence that says, you know, as commercial site plans are submitted.
And I'm going to leave that up to legal counsel to just say what maybe our preference would be. I just want something to go back to say, hey, this is what should have happened and it's going to happen and that type of stuff.
I think we're okay with the way that it's written.
Okay.
Frankly, they still have to have that shared parking agreement. So that still has to go through council, still has to be approved. If they come through and they don't have that parking agreement, council has every right to deny their plans. So we have to have that parking agreement when they come in for site plan.
Okay. Thank you.
So to add clarity for the record, the project qualifies for shared parking agreements, plural. And the intent would be, we're probably going to have 2 or 3 different commercial buildings. And when each of those site plans come in, it would be reviewed for and include its own shared parking agreement.
And do you see those commercial units coming in before the residential?
One of them we're working on right now. We've been working hard with a leasee for a really interesting company. I can't share more than that, but we're hoping that we have the first building here taking shape in a 2 to 3 month time frame now.
So we can't start the residential till you have the parking agreements in place. Is that my understanding?
No, we have a threshold, so we can begin to produce the portion of per the annexation agreement. It's what controls how we do that. We can get through 50% or something like that of the parking units. And at that point in time, we need to have, I think, the first 25% of the commercial through its approval.
Okay.
And so there's a little bit of a leader on the residential, and the commercial has to keep catching up to it.
Okay. But that's all in the annexation agreement then, as far as,
Correct.
and that's what we'll govern that. Okay. Thank you.
All right. All right, any other questions regarding this item on the agenda? All right. All right, well, thank you, Buck. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Good questions.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now move on to item number 2, is a discussion of the park tax recommendation allocations. And I'm going to let Camden lead out on this one. There you are, Camden. And scroll through all these neat things.
Yeah,
I think
thanks.
that we'll start here with I think maybe the primary focus will be the boat harbor. And I have a few things to add, but Cam, why don't you summarize this up for us?
Sure. Yeah. And I think largely this is just a discussion for council. But I know one of the main topics to consider is the boat harbor. And just to recap, as you see the funding types, we had the county grant, the TRCC tourism tax that the county has. So the funding that we received is supposed to be 50% of the total phase 1 project for the boat harbor. So 2.9 million. The county approved 50% as part of kind of a packaged deal that we worked with Utah Lake Commission on, where they approached the county as the board, tax board, on this and kind of sold it as this kind of master plan for the lake, where the Saratoga Boat Harbor, American Fork, and Vineyard Boat Harbor all would be making these improvements, creating these non-motorized recreation opportunities that would also tie into the lakeshore trail that the county is interested in as well. And so I think the goal of it was to try and create this package deal that is enticing to some of the goals that the county has for the regional county recreational opportunities. And so we feel like that's kind of what got us to the point and got us the 1.45. The UORG is a Utah Outdoor Recreational Grant. It's a state grant. I'm actually going to be presenting our project this Thursday for those funds. And then we have to match the 50% from the county, and we're wanting to leverage the UORG as well as city funds, which is split up into 3 different kinds: in-kind funds, impact fees, and then the park tax. So that's kind of the summation that gets us to the total phase 1 project cost of 2.9. After that, that's the context for the boat harbor, but I can answer any of the questions. I'll let you guys kind of take it from there in terms of what you want to discuss, boat harbor or anything else.
I can kind of tell you what I think is what has been a paradigm shift in that committee and the way that the commissioners are viewing it. There was a study by Lewis, Birmingham, and Young, and it showed American Fork City, Orem City on really getting a very poor share of the money. And we've known that for a very long time as we have gone towards this board with various projects. One of them was this project, only a much lesser amount. But I think that with Commissioner Ainge and Commissioner Ivey are looking at giving direction to put these in regional places that will have and attract a big draw into the area. One of those is the lake. They feel like the lake is underutilized, and by providing upgrades to the ports and where people can actually launch and use it, they think it's a big win for the county in general. And so therefore they went and really paved the way, I think, in those 3 areas that Camden described with Saratoga, American Fork, and Vineyard. And the board was overwhelmingly very, very supportive of the request. I think that they have kind of gone away from small requests or regional parks and things like that. That's more of an observation than anything that I've heard, except that I've never known them to grant 1.4 million to something like this. Other regional things they're looking at is they feel like that American Fork Canyon, Provo Canyon, and some of those other big resources that are within the county are areas to be looked at as well. They're looking at it more in buckets of money instead of just ad hoc. And so, so that's kind of, I think, the mindset of the commission. I talked to Commissioner Ainge today as well. I just wanted to be clear on what he felt, and when we came at him with that allocation of what had been put in and who had received the funds, American Fork and Orem really were kind of on the tail end of that. And I could tell that Commissioner Ainge was trying to rectify that, yet he did have a vision on regional type things like this, like the lake, and would like to see it more utilized. Now that is dictating the will of the commission, I know. But he seemed open to that, and he lobbied hard to be able to get almost, $5 million for amenities along the lake. The state legislature appropriated money for Wacara Way. And so we're seeing a lot of assets being put along the lake shore to help people to utilize Utah Lake. So that's a little, I'm not lobbying for it either. I'm just saying a little bit of the background and why. I'm a little shocked. We had a plan that was ready, available, the one that we pitched early, and we just had to update some of our numbers. Therefore, we were prepared and we received this grant. So,
Thanks, Mayor.
Anyway, is there any questions, or maybe the council doesn't want to go this direction? I don't feel like that it state in this. It's, well, we've got 1.4. Let's look at other places to spend it. It's very specific to the thing. But we have a really good commission that is very willing to listen, and so I've really appreciated that paradigm shift over the years as we've gone before this committee. The commission is giving good insight.
I think from my standpoint of the park committee, I think those of us who are kind of insiders in the city, so Camden and myself, just talked about the matching funds. I felt like I was perhaps a little short-sighted with this. I was overwhelmed to be getting money from the tourism fund after all that we had done, and after contributing nearly $750,000 every year for the past many years. And again, as Mayor said, kind of coming up short, and I got quite enamored with this. And then I started looking more into it, and with the match and none of those other prior to that time, I believe, had been matches, for instance, with Thanksgiving Point. And they received a tremendous amount of money to be able to, for one of the museums out there. And so I feel like I didn't lead the park committee. I just gave my input to the park committee as part of those meetings, that this was a priority for the city, just primarily because we were getting matching funds. I feel like we are just helping the commission. I know I seem adversarial, and every time the words come out of my mouth, including the past issue, I just feel like the city is doing so many things for so many other people. And with this particular instance, I mean, we're doing the county a favor, rather than the county coming through and distributing those dollars fairly as they should. And I know Commissioner Ainge is sensitive to that. I've lost my appetite for this, just based on, the city talks about $250,000 in kind. We're going to use impact fees, etc. I know those may not be tremendous budget hits, just in terms of general budget that we'll be putting towards that. But I've cooled a little bit since I dove deeper into it. And I have communicated that to 2 members of the committee. I have not been able to reach all of them, because the park committee worked very hard. In fact, our final meeting, probably the majority of our final meeting, was, finding ways that we could come up to do this. And Doug Gunther brought up a very good point. And he said, in none of our surveys has the boat harbor even registered with any of the people. It's like, wow, American Fork has a boat harbor, and the shift has kind of been away from that. So, not trying to play both sides of the same coin, I have backed off of this a little bit. I feel like the county is pushing an initiative, and I would love to see Utah Lake be viable again. I just don't know whether it should come this year with the current circumstance with American Fork City. I think they owe us more. I really do think they owe us more. Does that mean we'll get it? Absolutely not. But that's where I stand on this.
I brought that up with Commissioner Ainge. I think that this is something they'll work with us to bring through into the next year, because of the current circumstances. Again, they understand the complexity of matching funds and how they're being used right now. And I think they'd work. Well, I know that they would. And so, but that's one commissioner. But I feel like with one commissioner, Commissioner Ivy is on board with this as well. They really have a desire to improve the entire trail system around the lake and all the amenities that surround it, by having access to the lake, on not only just with beaches, but with the boats as well. And so, anyway, any other open to thoughts? I mean, we're going to have this will come before us in an action, and I'm happy to, if you want to call, if anybody wants to call and talk to Commissioner Ainge himself, or I can be voice for him after talking to him. But they truly have an idea that they would like to see the Utah Lake just be more utilized. That's they feel like that's being good stewards of the fund.
For me personally, I'll jump in here real quick. I understand them wanting to improve the amenities around the lake and things of that nature, but I think they've got a big public perception to overcome, and that's just using the lake in general. And, just from the people I talk with and things of that nature, since this has come up, talk to different people, and, they're going up and using the reservoirs up the canyons because they're cleaner, deeper. Even though it's probably more convenient, they'd rather be on the road 15, 20 minutes longer and go to a reservoir than they would Utah Lake. Now, I don't know if that's definitely not a scientific study. That's just the people that I'm talking with that I know that do boating on a regular basis. I take a look at our funds that we have, and I think the staff's done a great job, and hats off to you looking out for ways to be able to get those matching funds, particularly with the grant that's out there for 500,000 and things of that nature. But I look at it and say, is this a need, or are we just trying to follow? And I hope this doesn't come across wrong, but the dictates of the county. I would hope that they would come to us and we could work in a better partnership. We put a lot of money into Art Dye Park, and I'm willing to bet when you look at the significant region impacts that has with Cedar Hills, Highland Alpine, even Lehigh, bringing in the recreation programs, because a lot of those programs are capped, or those cities don't even have them that exist. I think you'd see more use from the county perspective out of a regional park like that than you would through the boat harbor. But that's just my personal feeling, and I'd love to see them still chip in. Maybe I'm just holding on to an old idea out there. I don't know. And maybe an old promise a council member or a commissioner made in one of our council meetings that stood before us and said it was going to happen. But, I feel like we have been working hard toward this. And I, just like Clark, when I first got that text message saying that this had been funded, I was ecstatic. I thought it was more of recognizing that imbalance, but the more I dig into it, the more I'm realizing that it really isn't recognizing the imbalance. It's a way of saying, hey, we thought of you guys, but we're going with what our priority is, and that's the lake right now. And I appreciate them having a listening ear, but I hope it would be a little more sharp and listening just a little bit more about these are the needs of our residents, but not just us. Look at all of North Utah County and look at the regional park significance. Lehigh didn't get a park tax to pass. Their park bond failed. They know they're running out of park space. So for them to come and help out and help us be able to supplement some of that in a regional impact, I think is important. So that's where I feel like the dollars would be better spent. So I don't know if there is a way to go back and say, can we use this 1.4 in a different direction? And then the second thought I have is just with the budget issues that we have right now, I still haven't seen the map of where the trail system was going to connect that was in the budget that was coming from the general fund. So I think, Camden, if you can email that out, we talked about it being somewhere around Rotary Park and tying in somewhere, and someone was going to send a map out to the council, but if that could be sent out to us.
You're talking about the trail and that was in the park tax application?
Was it in park tax application, or I thought that was out of the general fund?
I think it was out of impact fees.
There was $200,000 out of the budget that I thought was general fund money, and I could be wrong here.
That was
where
impact fee
that was
money.
coming
Yeah.
from.
Camden, I thought that was already sent out, if I'm not mistaken. Did you?
And maybe
It's
sorry.
definitely in the packet that we had in our budget discussion, and I recall it as being impact fees. But anyway.
We'll verify and get
Yeah.
you that drawing if you don't
Okay.
have it.
And so my thought was, and I need to maybe get some clarity on that, if we take that 300 and use the park tax money for that trail, if it was general fund money, that would free up the general fund money to be able to put that towards the road, where we had about a $250 shortfall from our road accrual fund that we've done historically, and help make up that shortfall. But that was some of the thoughts that I've had.
I admittedly need some tempering on this. And so I don't want to be an ugly voice in this, but the reason that I changed my tune is because for years, and Derek can attest to this, for years we went to the commission and to their, I think they called it a steering committee. We took lunches. I know I was a participant in at least 4. And in the last 3, they wanted baseball parks. That's all they wanted was baseball parks. And if we would install these baseball parks and we would, agree, then they could get us some money. And then I left the council for a period of time. And I know that we continued to try, and we came back. And when I came to, and I apologize, but I literally came to that, wait, these funds were never matching. And then through, talking to Mayor Frost, telling what the county initiative was and those things, and he was not trying to sway me one way or the other. I thought, wait a second, this is just the county pushing us in the direction they wanted to go again. And it's not the steering committee, and so I do have a bad taste in my mouth, and I'm trying to be objective. But when I marry that with the other things that, for instance, not a single time has the boat harbor raised much of an issue, and Camden, you can speak to this, has raised much of an issue of interest to the people in our city. I thought those park funds could be spent, that $300,000, because we cut significantly this year, and we may need to cut more based on sales tax. But I just didn't feel the love this year, quite frankly, after I came to a greater understanding.
And I'm gonna just give my opinion here. I actually can see why this would be appealing to the county. I think that there is some merit to building some things around it. I like Mayor Frost, what he said and the explanation he gave. My problem really is the matching funds and knowing that we have to match the funds in the next year or 2 when things are going to be so tight for us. It's so hard for me to justify putting that to something that I know our residents don't use very much, and that's their tax money that's going toward it. And that's really where I fall on that. I have a really big hang up having that matching right there that we have to cover.
Would it, and again, I'm not trying to hang on to anything that nobody wants, but would it be of any help to think that we could talk to the county to suspend that for even a 3-year grant, that we could just say to ourselves, we can get through the current situation, but not lose it. I don't think for a minute that we're going to have the opportunity to put this back in the pot and redistribute it in the way that we want.
Yeah, I think that's, so for
Oh.
yeah, for me, Mayor Frost, that would be perfect. Having it being delayed. For me, the hang up is budgetary constraints at the moment are so tight. I just have a hard time saying, yeah, go ahead, let's put money towards that, when we have other things that really could be, we could move stuff around to be used for it.
Okay.
But of the funds listed, no, I'll hold. Sorry.
I think I know what you're getting at. Those aren't general funds that they've listed, right?
Right.
But I think it comes down to, are there other things that can be paid with those things that we would have used with our general fund? If there's not, maybe it doesn't matter. But Rob gave one example that he had thought of, but it looks like Anna had put a chat there that actually was coming from impact fees. Yeah.
Well, in the park committee, as you can see in your packet, there's a lot of stuff that was turned down. And I just think of that $300,000 that we have committed, what of those things would better serve us? I was quite enamored with the matching funds before I'm sorry, I was a bit obtuse.
Well, I don't think so. I don't know about the matching fund. That doesn't, maybe because I haven't been on the council as long as you guys. I don't get enamored by it, but I actually can see more of an appeal of why the boat harbor and improvements, making a trail around the lake could be really enticing. But I don't think they're going to get necessarily money back for building those things. It's more just like, hey, this would be a great thing for our residents to use. It's not going to spur tourism.
Well,
Right.
and that's the whole purpose of this money, was supposed to gather this extra tax money, put it back in to increase tourism, that then would put money back into those businesses that are paying into it. And it drives me nuts that we have been sending tourism to every other town with American Fork business tax dollars, to Lehigh, to Provo, to all these other places that are getting this majority of the funds, and our business on the backs of a lot of our businesses. I'd love to have something actually we use in our city that's going to go back to the business community, that we could say, hey, this is actually impacting you. You can actually see where this is going to go. I don't think the boat harbor is going to increase tourism that much. So I have a problem spending $4 million or $3 million on that project, even though a good majority of those funds aren't ours. Second of all, I'd love for the county to do a survey just like we did inside of our city. This is the taxpayer money. What do they want to see done with it, right? Versus the county's pet projects of what may be out there. Be interesting to see what that would look like. But for me personally, the extension of time on the matching funds, for me, it's more of a basis of, hey, I'd love to work better with the county. I think it would be great to do a joint work session with them, just like we did that one time where we had a recorded meeting and we had 3 council members in the room, and let's actually talk about it. But you know, there needs to be adequate funding, but it can't come with these type of strings and, hey, you have to spend the money this way.
The other thing that I am worried about that I mentioned to Camden was how much park impact fees are already pledged to other things. And that I don't know the numbers well enough to know. He can weigh in on that, or Anna. I just don't want to overpromise impact fees.
Yeah, I believe we have the funds to cover this, but I don't have the numbers in front of me either, and that's something I can confirm and send out to you guys if you're interested.
Anna, you can jump in as well. The fund balance is there. The real issue is in our impact fee analysis, do we have this much money set aside for specifically Boat Harbor? We don't do impact fees for parks in this manner. It takes dollars potentially away from another project that may be more important to the city council right now. And so it is a matter of priority as well.
And Barbara and Kevin, maybe, and Camden could chime into this, because I only heard a little bit about it, but I think the Park and Recreation Committee is pretty big on putting money towards parks on the south end of town, from my understanding. And I think this would maybe be money better spent to a park on the south end of town versus the boat harbor.
My question would be, what choices do we have? I mean, do we get any input on saying, no, we don't want to do this, we'd rather have something else? We can say that. They might just say, go jump in a certain lake.
I don't think we're going to change the county's mind. I think the county has their thing set up. Like I said, I unfortunately am not objective, so I don't think that money's going to be ours. I think it's ours if we do what they want.
Right.
You can look at the request, Barbara, in your packet of where we could receive recommendation from the park committee, where else to put those dollars from our own park requests.
Oh, absolutely. No
but I think
question
those county dollars are going where the county wants them to go.
Yeah. And years ago, there were studies about the boat harbor and how many people from out of the area use it to launch their boats. A lot of people came from Salt Lake County, and they're eating lunch here. They're buying gas here. There are some things that we get back from it. It's not as big as the other things that we would want, but it's not a complete loss.
We're until Saratoga actually gets theirs up, we're the closest one to Salt Lake County. And maybe Derry or even Camden could know even briefly a percentage. A lot of the people that come here are from Salt Lake County, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know those demographics specifically.
Now, this has been years ago that I read that study, but I don't imagine it's changed too much.
Yeah.
So to what was said, you're right. The Park and Trails Committee, parks in the south side are definitely a priority. I would say they probably think recreational opportunities in the south side, of which this could be one of them, I think would be an opportunity. At least one of them have voiced appreciation that we're seeking after additional funds. And so in that sense, they were happy with this. Although their top priorities, which were solidified really before this boat harbor opportunity came to light, was the trail that we had in the park application, as well as bathrooms at Quail Cove. But to jump back to the harbor, I would say phase 2 is intended to have a small park and playground area attached to this boat harbor, which would add specifically park space to the south side. It'd be a small one relative to they're wanting to do a fairly large regional one at some point, and some other standard sized ones as well. Yeah, you can kind of see on that one, it looks like it's just a green space attached to some additional parking on that image that Van Lynn's showing, and doesn't have a playground identified specifically. So we're in the sense that we're trying to create some open space and recreational opportunities. This is in the south side, and it would benefit those in proximity closest to it. As I said to the park tax board, they're right. Clark's right. In the survey, nothing was indicated that the harbor was a top priority. We don't really advertise it. We're not really trying to promote it. We understand that it's lacking in a lot of ways. And so I don't necessarily think the utilization in the past should necessarily dictate how valuable it would be in the future. And I think with some good efforts, we could make this well promoted. There are other concerns, like Rob has brought up too, such as just the lake itself and the quality there. I think there's a perception issue as much as anything. Not that there is danger in the health with algae blooms, but there's a perception. So as soon as the first news report comes that algae blooms are in the lake, everyone just like, well, that's it for the lake. When in reality, there's months still of lake use, because the algae blooms are really only in the south side of the lake or a very localized portion. And like I said, that's just a communication aspect. Regarding the county, if I can say one more thing, I have not been part of the history of the relationship between us and the county and some of those details. As I understand, we have applied a couple times for other projects that we deemed a higher priority and have not been able to get them. And I know, the funding kind of comes from us largely, in part, in other words, in addition to other entities. But my experience with grants typically are matching is not at all uncommon, and grants typically work. The entity providing the money has interests and that where they want to see the money go. And if you want to take advantage of the money, you've got to align yourself with those interests. Otherwise, you have to find other funding to suit what you need. So in that sense, this seemed to make sense. Was more of just here's the money. If we want it, we do the boat harbor. If we don't want it, then we can go seek funding elsewhere for what we want. And then the last comment is it seems like some of your comments are as if this is the only opportunity, whereas from what I understand, this level of funding, the city gets or the county gets every single year. And so there's a possibility of applying for an art dye or another regional park or other stuff in the future, in addition to this as well. But, there's also the opportunity to postpone this if we needed to also. So those are my comments. Sorry to take so much time.
I just wonder what the county would think if we say we don't want this, it'd probably be 10 years before we got anything else again.
I thought that too.
Yeah, and that you're right on all of those fronts, but even Mayor Hatfield was going to go to the state because, you know, Camden, you're right, for these grants. But when we are the second or third largest contributor and we can't even get a sniff, I mean, that's really tough to stomach, because we are the lifeblood of that thing. And if we walk away, you know what, I don't know. And we've had at least 3 applications for art dye. When Brad and Rob and I were first, the thing that Rob was referring to, we had a commissioner come over after our presentation and all but say it was ours. And then of course it never formulated. So I don't know how long the memory of the county will be if we say we don't take this year. I'm not saying that we don't take it. I'm just saying it deserves another look, because we pulled back from the standpoint of a park committee. We pulled back on several other things that would be in our community and do have interest to channel money to the boat harbor to make this happen and take advantage of those matching funds.
Yeah, and I think what Barbara said is right on. I didn't actually know that people from Salt Lake frequently come down to the lake. I thought it was more infrequent. And like I said, I can see some merit in wanting to have some amenities on the lake. I'm actually kind of torn, more than some of you, because it's hard to give away those matching funds. And it doesn't bother me that, yeah, that's what the county wanted it for. It's still something that could be good for the community. And whoever said, yeah, that it's Camden was saying that it is an amenity that's closer to the south side, which is a place that we are looking to put more recreational use. I like that too. So basically, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just going back and forth and I can't decide.
I think not illustrated on here, there is a way of saving that sandy beach. And there's, and I forget what they call it, but you actually put it out there and it just kind of cuts down on the waves. And so if you live down there and you could walk down there, you could have a sandy beach. That would be a very interesting element to think that I was just 5 minutes from there, 2 minutes from there, and I could walk down there. So I think, yeah, there it is. You can kind of see the outline on it right there. I think there's a couple ways of moving forward. I mean, we're petitioning for another grant of $500,000. Perhaps we can look at what $1 million can do. I think $1 million and some in-kind donations could at least repair the asphalt parking lot. The parking lot, as you know it, if you've been down there, if it rains on any given summer day, the only way that's going to get off is going to be through evaporation. The parking lot is in really bad shape. And so maybe we scale it down and give money back and say, okay, we have another grant that matches at 500 and we can have the in-kind that is always, that they said that we could, they're very open to work with us on that. I don't think I think we say, hey, how about 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
If we have, and then we can just kind of take it and do what we can as we see this economy kind of come back and we get a new normal. And so
I like that idea of looking for the 3 years.
Yeah.
No, I
To
just,
me, that's a little more palatable.
and maybe this is just fueling my sensitivity to the issue, but I pulled up the Daily Herald article earlier this year on what the projects they funded, and 4.3 million for the expansion of Provo Airport.
Right.
No matching funds there. You've got 100 and some odd thousand that went to the Provo's Freedom Festival. So I have a more basic issue that I just don't approve. I don't like how they're spending the money. Now that's neither here nor there. I'm just a council member. I'm not a commissioner, but I would hope with whatever we do, we can clearly communicate whatever our expectation is of a city and really hammer that home. And, you know, I know that Mayor Hadfield was close to going and lobbying the legislature to redo the state code on how these were funded, that a percentage of it had to be proportionate to where those funds are raised. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. And we kept saying, well, the commissioners at the time, we'll make it right with you. We'll make it right with you. Now here we are with a whole different set of commissioners. Maybe we don't. Maybe we put our lobbyist on it. But for me, there's kind of two issues. One being how it's being spent and getting that back somewhat proportionate. And the second issue is the boat harbor, the best place for us to be spending our money right now for our residents. And I take a look at it and I'm just a flat out no. I think there's a lot of other things that we could do. You know, the bathroom at Quail Cove Park, that's one that I think we'd get a lot more use from our residents out of. I think we could get the use numbers. A lot of, I don't know how much of the receipts down there at the boat harbor are cash versus credit card, but we could pull those credit card receipts and look at the zip codes and see where they're coming from over the last year. That should be pretty easy to do with our merchant services, whoever's doing that for us. And I think that we've had a sandy beach down there for quite a few years now, at least 2 that I'm aware of. And I'm not sure that it's all that we think that it's going to be and draw people down there too. So for me, I just feel like there's better ways to spend that 700,000 of impact fees for 400 and the 300 of park tax funds. But that's just my opinion.
Well, I'm just going to recommend this. I mean, this will be in front of us as an action item. We had good discussion about it. You're open to talk to the commissioners and just express your opinion as well. And then we'll just see where the votes lie. And then I quite honestly, I can understand. I just have a hard time giving away free money. Well, it's not free because we have to match it, but I'm a little torn like you, Stacy. I can see this and conceptually this looks good. Our boat harbor is not very well. You just can't maintain something that just is in such bad repair. This gives us an actual water line and a sewer line, and it just makes it more usable. So
Mayor,
yes.
I've avoided chiming in for a couple of reasons, but if I could, just a couple of comments, things I've written down. I don't know if this is a field of dreams or not kind of a scenario. If we do build it, we do make it good, will people come? I'm not a boater. I have one kid that has a boat that lives in Pleasant Grove. They never think about going to Utah Lake. They go up Provo Canyon and go to one of the ones that are fairly close up that canyon. There are several of them. And they do that a few times a year, like most people don't use their boats every weekend. But they don't go down there at all, as far as I know. I think the algae bloom is a huge deal because of the perception. I don't know if it's a huge deal or not, but I think the perception is that it is a huge deal. And I think it kind of shuts the lake down. And because of that, I think the use is limited. The one comment that I've really written down that, well, I'm going to make 2 comments. First, I think it was Einstein, Rob, you may correct me on this, that said, if you keep doing the same thing over and over and expect different results, it's insanity, right, Barbara? And I remember those discussions for years that we were going to get something. We've never gotten anything from the county. What makes us think they're going to be any different now? Rob cited a couple of things. We've seen them put money in Lehigh at Thanksgiving Point, all these other things, and we just keep getting passed by. Why didn't we get money for Art Dye? That makes no sense to me. If that's a regional park, that should have gotten money. So my confidence level, and I realize it's a new commission and it'll be a new commission in a couple of years. It may even be a new commission fairly soon. We don't know. My confidence level in them based on past experience, I don't have much confidence in them worrying about American Fork. I don't know that they care that we give that fund a lot of money. Maybe they don't know. I can't believe they don't know. But if they don't, their actions tell me that they don't care. And I'm kind of along the line of where can we get the most bang for the money? I think the only reason we're even thinking about this is because we got the matching funds. I don't remember much discussion in the 4+ years I've been on the council of the boat harbor and what we need to do. We've talked a little bit about, yeah, it's crappy and we ought to do something, but never to this interest level. And I realize we're looking at a chance to double our money up to a point, but it's going to cost us a lot of additional money. So with all of that said, and with all of our other demands, and I can see a whole list of things on this park tax that I'd much rather see money go to. So I'm starting to lean stronger and stronger against it for right now to see if we can't negotiate something better in the future. What have we got to lose? We haven't had anything in the past. So if they tell us no and tell us to go take a hike, I don't see that we've lost that much, but that's just the bald head, and I'll shut up.
All right, well, we have a special session that I would like to start on time. I think there'll be people that'll be waiting for that. And so I think that we've had good discussion on this. We'll see where it comes to when we actually allocate funds. And thank you for very much. And as noted, Camden will send out the master plan again. So
Just out of curiosity, Mayor, just a couple points. When is this going to come up for vote? Do we know kind of a timetable, what council meeting this will be on?
David, can you help me with that? I've got, our.
Yep, let me take a look here. So it will be on the, I want to say it's on the May 12th agenda.
Okay.
Let me take it tentatively.
That's
And
next
for me,
week.
it'd be helpful if we could send out the most recent study that maybe Barbara had referenced on the boat harbor. I'd love to read that, as well as any statistical data we have on who's using it and where they're coming from.
Yeah, the study that I saw was 10 or 12 years ago, so it's definitely not up to date.
I want to be able to have a chance to address the park committee as well. I don't know if any of them are on or participating at this point. I haven't looked at the participant list, but I would like to talk to all of them and get their feelings on it as well.
It may be helpful for us to have the park committee then take another look at this, give another recommendation, and I think we could slide that back to maybe the first meeting in June.
We can.
Do
If
we
that
have a
would- that would
deadline
help
from
the
the
park
county?
committee.
No.
Well, I would say
Sorry.
move it back and do all of those things.
Well, what we've done in the past is if like we've gone to a vote and the council then has taken anything that we didn't disperse and then gone back and asked them to disperse it. I don't know if one way is better or the other, but that is what we've been doing.
I
think we whittled away at some of the requests, so didn't give them all the money that they asked for so that we could pull out and put towards this. I'm not saying that the park committee will change that. I would just like to have them, I don't know, Camden, what do you think?
So as I understand this, you're saying to take the amount that they recommended for the boat harbor and ask them to redistribute it to something.
No,
Okay.
not at all. I just want to go back to them and tell them the feelings and kind of, and maybe it's personally for me, because if you remember, I advocated pretty big for the boat harbor. I'm not trying to get them to vote against it. I just want them to have an understanding that this is as a county initiative. The idea of free money is still exactly the same, although, even when something's on sale doesn't mean you have to buy it. So I just feel like I want them to have that context that I did not give them accurately the first time. I'm not saying they'll change their mind at all. It may remain exactly the way it is.
I would say from my end, in drafting those contracts, I would much prefer to go back to the committee first before, rather than approving some and then going back and asking how to redistribute the rest. Because I have a feeling the committee may give more money to some of the already approved projects or recommend additional monies to some otherwise already approved projects. And it would be easier from a contract perspective just to know what those numbers were and not have to do addendums to those agreements.
I agree.
I would agree with that. I'm thinking kind of the quilting ladies that wanted the sewing machines. They've said, thanks, but no thanks, because it doesn't do what we want to do. You know, if they had a chance to, if the committee had a chance to relook at the way the money's going to be spent, I'm just guessing it's going to come back in probably different ways than we might be thinking of.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 150,000.
That's right. It's 150,000. And so I think primarily what would come up first on the list would probably be the bathroom at Quail Cove. I don't know if the park committee received the same note from the quilting people as us. I don't know. I think it's worth going back to them. And I agree with Cheryl Ann. It would be nicer. It would be better to be able to have that beforehand. I'm not going in as a dissenting vote. I'm merely going in saying, I think my view of this needs to be looked over again. Not that I have any impact at all. I'm certainly not assuming that. I just feel like I need to let them know.
I'd be
Yeah,
very
I'm
supportive of
thinking-
that, just because.
Well, I'm just really thinking that if you go back to them saying, hey, we want you to take another look at that, that is an implicit, the council doesn't want to do this. And until you have a vote on that particular portion, I think it's hard for them to know either way. That's just what I think.
Right. And Stacy, you're right, except I would be going back and Mayor, I am sensitive here. Sorry, I'll be quick. I would be going back saying, look, this matching fund situation is not standard. And like we thought it would be, and this is clearly an initiative that the county is pushing. And, we talk about going back to the county and saying, how about 3 years? We ought to go back to the county and say, how about a 3/4 match? You're doing this with Vineyard, you're doing this with Saratoga Spring. Why don't you go 3/4? Why don't you show your skin in the game and we'll come up with a quarter? I mean, there's no set ordinance that says it has to be 50-50 with the way they have positioned it now. I don't believe. I still believe they owe us. That doesn't mean we'll get it, but so maybe I would have somebody else go back, Stacy. Maybe that would be the best thing, to go back and pitch it and have it not be me.
Well, and as I watched the meeting that happened, there was quite a discussion and there was a lot of questions of it. And Clark, you did a great job, because they said, Clark, what's the discussion been at the council level? And you said there hasn't been any, because we really didn't have a chance to discuss this at all before it went to them. And so I think coming back, I trust Clark to give that perception of, well, here's how some members feel and here's the concerns. And now they can kind of understand maybe that this isn't clear cut and dry and that we were pushing for it and that we all wanted it, if that makes sense.
At least we could say, these are some of the questions that we have. Have you considered this, this, and this?
All right. If you're comfortable with doing that, Councilman Taylor, let's see where they land and how they recommend, and it'll clear things up for us and especially for Cheryl Lynn.
Okay.
And we can make with, I still think we push forward with that state grant. I mean, it's matchable to what we have, and we continue to work with what we can get. But I do think they'll hold on to this for at least 2 to 3 years. I really think they want to work with us on it. And so maybe we don't let it go.
Is there enough to try the 3/4 quarter, or is that just folly?
I really threw out a home run today, and I asked him to just, do you think the commission, and it is, I said, would you consider the match just what we put into it? And he says that would go against what the commission's done in other times. So I think what they're doing is kind of treating us like equal children amongst the 3 boat harbors that they funded. And there is consistency in the way that they looked at that, albeit Vineyard had an incredible corporate donation with a big developer to enhance theirs. So I can't speak for what they did for the airport and all that, but I know that in the 3 things around the lake, they did do similar things.
Well, and maybe it's not a 3/4 match. Maybe it's, hey, if we do the boat harbor and that's something you want, take a look at one of our projects and tell us you'll approve it, right? So we'll put money towards the boat harbor. Why don't you put money towards the art dive park? And then maybe it's a win-win versus the forcing of the hand a little bit, that I personally feel like that, you know, it's our businesses that are putting money in. We're happy to match 50%, but next year you guys need to come back and approve a project. And I would see that being a win-win that I could get behind at that point.
Yeah. Well, their board is much like our park tax board, and to force that hand like that was just stated, we'll do this, but you have to do that. I'm not sure they'll go for that, but you know what? Nothing hurt. We can always ask. We can always ask, and you know what? We can send new people in to ask as well.
Yeah.
And so we put everybody up to bat. And but I think that in large measure, this commission is different. And for the probably the best one we've had to work with us in a decade. And so anyway, I think we've beaten this thing over the head pretty hard. And I do want to move on to, is there any other things that perhaps we could, but I'd like to move on. I have a personal commitment into the special session that I feel like I need to be to. So, and number 3, let's move on to the discussion on the 2021 budget. We have the general fund, the fleet fund, the fitness center fund, storm drain fund, and the recycling sanitation fund. And I don't want to skip on time because these are all a big deal, especially this general fund. And so, Anna, you were very prepared the last time, so I'm just going to let you take it from here.
Great. If I can get to share the screen, that would be great, Gwendolyn. Yeah. Okay. Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to discuss the general fund and the fund that was budget this year. It's been an unprecedented time with COVID-19 pandemic and all the uncertainty surrounding that. So we have looked at a lot of different things. We're starved for data. We're getting new information daily. There's changes daily. And it's been very difficult, a little bit of a roller coaster back and forth with our revenues and our expenditures, trying to narrow it down to what we think will happen. And again, new information daily. As we present a tentative budget, it should change the next day. That's just how it's been going the last month or so. And so we will expect amendments after we present it to you. But that's the case with all the cities in Utah County. And we've looked again at all these things. We've looked at unemployment rates, housing impacts, industry data. We are on weekly meetings with the Utah League of Cities, with town halls with other finance people in other cities around the area. We are looking at health guidelines and directives from the Utah County Health Department, the governor's office. So all these things we're taking into consideration as we try to narrow down our estimates.
Can I just point out, Anna, and Anna's correct, we have just tried to do a tremendous amount of research to figure out where we need to be in our budget. And the scenarios range anywhere from a positive 8% growth to a negative 39% retraction. So I mean, there's a huge range here from very optimistic to very pessimistic on what's going to happen next year. And, you know, we've tried to take into account all of those studies and really dig into why those studies would suggest one way or the other, and then take a specific look at what American Fork how it would be affected, literally dissecting our sales tax revenues, our property tax revenues, our franchise fees tax revenues. So we've really tried to dive deep into every single facet of the budget. And like Anna said, every bit of new information that comes, we evaluate that and we try to make our budget even more accurate. And so that will continue. We have proposed a tentative budget that's balanced, but in between the time we present the tentative budget to the final budget in June, there may be additional modifications. And we're just going to make it as accurate as we can, with the understanding that there may need to be a budget amendment during next year's fiscal year period. And so that's kind of the position we're in right now. Sorry, Anna, go ahead.
Thanks, Steve. That was a great explanation. Like I said, it's been a roller coaster, but we're taking out every bit of data that we can possibly find and evaluating it and incorporating it into the budget. So on that note, the first place we start is with revenues. We need to know what our resources are in order to know what we can spend. And so looking at each line item in the revenue, including sales tax, which we'll go over, property tax, permits, licenses, development, all of that taken into account, we have estimated that we'll go back to almost 2019 and 2018 numbers as far as revenue. So we are in a downward turn, especially as we wade through this pandemic, until we can kind of hit the upward curve and see how things shake out. So as far as our revenues, the majority, as you know, is tax revenue, sales tax, property tax, franchise fees, those sort of taxes. 28% is charges for services. We have some licenses and permits. So a lot of our revenue is determined on taxes, which can fluctuate in an economy, as we're seeing right now. Part of that tax, most of that tax, is sales tax revenue. We went from 9,000 estimated in 2020, and we're going downward to 7.7 million. That's where we think it'll shake out. And again, those numbers are changing every day, but we feel pretty confident with that. As we looked at individual businesses, our auto dealerships, our big box stores like Walmart and Target, some other retail stores, we're looking and evaluating every single one of those, and each industry is different. So we landed at the 7.7, and we'll continue to evaluate that as more information comes about.
Sorry, Anna, just real quick, what was that historically in the past? Was it about 9 million historically?
So 2017, it was 7.7. So we're going back to 2017 numbers, and it's gradually gone up to 9 million in 2020.
Okay, thank you.
So this is the total estimate that we are coming up with for our general fund revenues. Last year in 2020, the approved number was 24 million. 24.6 million, and we're going down to 22.7 million. So each of these different types of revenues have been affected. As you can see in this slide, taxes, licenses, and permits, they're all heading in a downward turn. The biggest hit, the biggest portion of revenues is sales tax. So we have a total downturn of 9% from last year. Licenses and permits is down 36%. Interest and miscellaneous is also down 25%. That includes some true up on interest that was over budgeted last year.
Just real quick, Anna, sorry, what's the transfer in? There was a huge jump there. What's attributing to that transfer in?
Great question. So I was looking at the transfers in the last 2 years. We had about 2 million that went to capital projects per the new fund balance policy. To cover for COVID-19 and for some of these extraordinary circumstances, we're proposing to fill that gap with a transfer back to the general fund to cover that deficit. the decrease in revenues. So as far as tax revenue, property tax is virtually flat. That's because of our certified tax rate. We should expect to get about the same amount of revenue as last year. Motor vehicle, based on the per gallon and population allocation, and less people are hitting the roads, more people are staying home. So we're estimating a decrease there. Sales tax obviously is decreasing, and then franchise tax, including electric franchise and telecommunications, we're expecting to decrease as well.
Hey, Anna, I heard something interesting, and I don't expect it to factor in right now, but on a broadcast that I was listening to, it would actually have a converse or would be opposite of what we're seeing with motor vehicle, and that is that people are going to want to travel, but it's going to be by their own car rather than the other ways that have been traditional in the past. And so we could see, especially with oil prices where they are, their view was motor vehicle traffic was going to increase significantly in this next year.
Do you remember what your source was for that? I'd love to.
I will go back and find that. I don't think it was pure conjecture, but it may have been. But I thought that was interesting. It's an interesting point. It's not a data point that you could throw in and change everything. That's not what I was saying. But it stands to reason that there might be a significant amount of more vehicle usage than, for instance, flying or something like that. So
certainly the hope. I think the thought behind this was that people aren't going to work; they're staying home and telecommuting.
Right. That completely makes sense.
But hopefully it'll pick up sooner than later, and through the summer, I think a lot of people are going to hit the road as well.
And real quick, what is our historical increase from growth from property taxes that we've seen? So we got the certified rate, and then you get plus growth. Is there a dollar amount or ballpark number that we have that we're getting attributed to growth every year?
Yeah, certainly. I don't have those numbers in front of me. I don't want to misquote, but I think it's around 100,000 a year.
Okay.
But I can take a look at that.
That'd be awesome. That's something I'd love to see.
No problem. So other categories are licenses and permits. With development, we haven't seen a slowdown yet, but we're expecting that. It's just a matter of what the impact will be and how long it will last. There's usually a delay in that, so we'll kind of wait to see how that pans out. But we would like to underestimate those revenues instead of having to take away revenue later. Charges for services, we're anticipating an increase. This is to, we'll talk about this later, but we're proposing a city engineer as a new position, and that will be a charge for service through the enterprise funds. So the enterprise funds will pay for that position. So that's just the increase there as far as a charge for service. Other fees decrease, although public safety contracts are going up per the contract. We are seeing obviously a decrease in the recreation, park, and library fees since those facilities are closed. Lastly, fines and forfeitures, we're expecting to decrease a bit, and then miscellaneous, again, is interest revenue to reflect the true up and lower interest rates.
Sorry, and one other thing I'd love to see too is we had almost a whole season of recreation programs that got canceled. And I think the policy was, hey, you can either get a credit or ask for a refund. Is that right? How we handled that?
I believe so, yes.
Just love to maybe see the numbers of where that plays out. So seeing what our on the books liability of credits would be at and how much has been refunded.
We just got done processing today the spring soccer refunds, about 20,000.
Okay.
But as far as credits versus fees returned, I'll have to look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Derek, did you want to say something?
Councilman, yeah, with baseball, we still have baseball coming. Really tried to hold on to that one, but that one will be another significant refund round. We saw a 50% refund, 50% credit on soccer. A lot of them were able to move to the fall season. But baseball will be different because typically we don't have a fall season. We may try and get creative and do something for baseball. So those are still coming.
So we've determined and estimated what our revenues are, and that's our base amount for determining how much we can spend. And so we're trying to work within those parameters. Within expenditures, this is an overview of what we're spending the money on. So about 51% is public safety. That includes fire and police. The other part, 12%, is community services, which is libraries, parks. Public works is going to be all of your streets and building maintenance, building inspection, permitting, and that sort of thing. General services, that's all your administration, council, legal, and then transfers out as well. That
I'm
goes.
just glad that Adam made it on there at 1%. He hit the chart, you know, the Adam Van Vliet hit the chart finally.
We haven't put that in a group function, so that's kind of on its own, but yes, it did make it in there. The one thing I didn't want to point out is the expenditure types. And so this is what our struggle was this budget year is 73% of our budget is personnel. And that's a huge chunk. So when you're talking about decreasing line items and trying to keep personnel intact, it's a difficult thing when most of your budget is personnel. How do you decrease that while still keeping personnel on? Because again, we don't know how long this is going to last. We haven't discussed. We've kept all the personnel on, and we have cut part-time just based on our facility closures. But again, it's balancing operations versus personnel, and where do you make those cuts? So as far as our expenditures, this is a high-level summary of the different types of functions, so administrative, community services, and so on. As you can see, all of them took a decrease with the exception of police and a little bit of increase in planning. There was no change, it stayed pretty flat. And I'm going to talk about each of these functions as quickly as I can in the following slides. So administrative services, I try to break it down by total change and then also break it down by personnel and operations, what we decreased for each of those types. So personnel decreased just a little bit. We're taking the administrative assistant who is retiring and changing it to a part-time position. Operations decreased a bit because we didn't have an election in the 2021 year, and we also had completion of special projects, which I believe was the 5-year financial forecast. Community services, the biggest decrease was the parks and boat harbor based on personnel cuts and part-time, with facility closures and trying to handle the governor's directives. We've decreased those hours for the first quarter of the 2021 year budget. Operations decreased for fleet maintenance, some library decreases for books and technology. Again, we're trying to go back to the 2019 budget year and the services that we're providing in order to fit within the parameters of the resources that we have. So a lot of hard decisions, cemetery for supplies and some engine repairs. So police is the only large department that increased. This is because we are recommending, based on their request, 1 full-time police officer, 1 full-time sergeant, and 2 part-time records specialists to help with paperwork and within the animal control, I believe. Operations is flat. Most of their budget is for personnel, and then capital decreased just slightly based on their request last year for more cars than we're recommending for this budget year.
And can we talk about the timeline of hiring those new positions?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a little asterisk on the bottom, and we are recommending these positions. However, until things become a little more stable, we'd like to hold off on hiring those new positions after we evaluate the first quarter. for at least 3 months, maybe even 6 months into the year. So it's more of a placeholder until we kind of see how things shake out a bit and feel more confident that the city's on an upward turn and we can recover some of those sales tax revenues.
And that's based on a fiscal quarter, not a calendar quarter is what you're referencing.
That would be the July through September quarter.
Okay.
And that's for all of the positions, including fire and engineering as well. So fire personnel increased based on adding 3 full-time firefighters and paramedics, 1 battalion chief, but the opposite of that is we're reducing some of the part-time shift coverage because the full-time will take those hours. And so it's kind of a net increase of 125,000. Operations decreased because of the legal services based on the Gold Cross case. We're not expecting as high of a cost there in the new year. And then capital increased a bit by adding a battalion chief vehicle. So for public works, we are recommending based on department requests to add a city engineer. And as I mentioned earlier, it'll be charged back to the enterprise fund. So the water, sewer, storm drain will pay for that position. And then slightly, I think that position was about 150,000 with full benefits. So the remaining would be the discretionary merit increases. Operations decrease based on road and sidewalk maintenance. We had to cut somewhere. And so unfortunately that took a cut. Building maintenance decreased a bit for janitorial and asphalt maintenance, trying to get back to those 2019 service levels. Recreation decreased. This is mostly based on reducing part-time hours for all of their recreation programs, including soccer and baseball, and also program expenses because some of those programs are being modified for this year. So total decrease is 7.6%. Other expenditures, just worth mentioning, operations decreased about 4.7%. These are just minor items, legislative memberships. It was over budgeted in previous years, so we took it down based on trends. Legal services increased a bit based on, these are all based on historical trends the last 3 years. Executive decreases, we moved audit to administration. It was in the mayor's office before, so we put that in the finance and administration department. Seniors decreased a bit to reflect some program costs for the last 3 years. And then we also decreased historical and beautification based on the last 3 years of expenses. So it's more of a true up to see where things have landed the last 3 years based on their averages. That's all for general fund. We did balance the general fund revenues to equal expenditures. We did have that transfer back from capital projects, so that filled the gap of the loss in revenue. And so we are balanced as of now, and that's what we will present in our tentative budget. So as far as fitness center, we're seeing the same thing. The revenues are going down, the facility's closed. We've estimated, and based on Derek's recommendation, we're decreasing revenues about 25%, basically the first quarter of the fiscal year. And so that shakes out to about 457,000 from last year.
And if I could jump in real quick, how are we handling the rec passes? It's one question I've had, and you know, I've seen other places where they said, hey, we kind of put your membership on hold and it's going to go, you know, and start back up that clock when you can use the facility again. Others may be offering refunds proportionate to the time of their membership.
Derek, maybe you can speak to this, but we haven't seen a lot of refunds yet. I think we're holding off on their timeline. However, it'll affect probably the renewals in January when people are having a big push with their New Year's resolution. So we will probably see a loss there as far as the timing of renewals. I don't know, Derek, if you have anything else.
That's what we've communicated to our members is based upon the amount of time that we're closed. That's how long we'll extend our membership once we reopen, and hoping to get back as many as we can. We do anticipate we will lose some, just ones that don't want to come back, and we'll try to put them on hold, but anticipate some refunds, and then try and get creative in the beginning of 2021 of how can we entice them to renew, even though they've probably been extended 8 weeks or so, to capture that revenue. So we will see an impact coming up. And then also trying to get creative for our summer pass sales, depending on what happens with swimming pools. We don't know that for sure yet. So we'll have to work on that.
Mayor, just real quick, you're on mute.
And we're kind of communicating with our neighbors. Lehigh is doing similar things. So there's one agency is not a vacuum to itself, to the other. And Lehigh is just kind of telling the members that very same thing. Just kind of put on hold. I communicated with Mayor Fugel. That's where they're at. That could change. Who knows what could change, but at least for the next couple weeks until we kind of see what happens as we move into this new phase. So, sorry. Take it away, Anna.
Thanks. Yeah, charges for services, like I said, will decrease 25%. These are conservative estimates. Hopefully we'll get back and running sooner than later. But I don't know that we'll get a full level of service for the next year that we had in 2020 and previous. It'll probably take a while for that to happen, but we're monitoring it. Personnel, we decreased 20%. This is for part-time and overtime hours that based on facility closures and programming. Operating decreased 87,000. Because facilities are closed, the pool's not running yet. We're anticipating a decrease in the utility expense. Also merchandise and concessions, obviously, programs. Credit card and admin charges, we're not taking in fees, as many fees, and we're also, technology is also down 7,000. So there's just not a lot of use there. And then the transfer, however, did go up to 727, and we're looking at that, and it's up as far as a subsidy of 34% of total expenditures. This is up from last year of 25%. This is not where we want to be, but with most of our personnel being the main cost of the fitness center, until we're up and running, it's hard to cover those costs without adjusting our staffing. So we're aware of that, and we're looking at it. We're hoping that'll go down as the fitness center goes back online. So as far as the fleet fund, not a lot of changes. These are based on the capital needs. If anything took a hit, it's going to be capital. We looked at staffing first, and then operations second, and capital third as far as priorities. So administrative charges went up just slightly. Lease proceeds went down. We had the ambulance and brush truck and the ladder truck in 2020, which we don't have this year. So there's no lease proceeds in 2021. That's a decrease of 2.1 million. And then again, the ladder truck isn't in 2021, so that also decreased 2.2 million. Our debt service went up because of that, the ladder truck and the ambulance. So that's the changes there. But as far as purchases, the only purchase that we have, as you can see here, is the fire vehicle of 37,000 for the battalion chief. Police vehicles went down a little bit. Last year we had a street truck and sewer truck, which we don't have in 2021. So there's a difference there. As far as debt service, again, the increase in the fire and ambulance lease. So we're just trying to manage those fleet purchases and trying to be conservative and not purchasing in the 2021 year. So as far as sanitation recycling, we brought this to you at the beginning of March. So since then, there's been a little bit of change. We recommended an increase in March, but however, we're looking at it again and just trying to stay flat and conservative with our revenue. So that's the only change that we're bringing forward, is to have the revenues stay flat for the next year. Many of the expenditures did not change, however, from when we brought it to you in March. We do have a rate increase for recycling. We had that last year in July 1, so that was going back an increase in 2020, but we're keeping that increase in 2021. Storm drain, the same thing. We came to you in March with a slight increase. However, we're going to keep it flat this year. We just wanted to update you on those numbers to keep it in the 2020 levels. So again, for storm drain, overall revenue is flat. Expenses increase based on personnel, some stormwater management plan updates, and a couple capital improvements. Street improvements, the 400 South and the storm drain portion of the water line project. As far as the storm drain impact, overall revenue decrease, and we're doing this across the board for development. We're decreasing revenue for development about 30% based on our estimations, and then the overall expense increase based on 200 South improvements to 2.5 million. This is just the estimated storm drain portion of that 200 South project. So that's all I have for the budget. And the next steps are on May 7th, we're having a virtual open house in a couple of days. We're just doing that online and having residents submit questions via email. May 12th, we're bringing to you a tentative budget. We're almost complete with that. And then May 19th is the work session for RDA funds. June 2nd is a budget wrap up. And then June 23rd, we are anticipating the adoption of the budget and certified tax rate. So that's all I have. If you have any questions.
Just real quick, Anna, how are we advertising for that May 7th open house?
I believe it's going on Facebook and our website. I need to confirm with Camden on that.
Okay. Is there any information? This is the first I've heard of it, which is great. I think it's great we're doing it. I just want to make sure that it's one thing to hold it, another to make sure everyone's aware of it that wants to.
Yeah, it's a little difficult this year because we're closed. To do it virtually, it's a little unprecedented. So yeah, we'll try to get the word out as much as we can.
I'll be advertising it tonight.
We might double our attendance. Do that.
Maybe even more than double.
Maybe.
I just want to point out, Anna's done a great job working through all the facets of the budget. It's very complex. Of course, municipal finance has specific pots of money you can use in certain ways, and other funds you cannot. You know, as you look at this budget and these projections, some people may think we're being too aggressive on our reductions in revenue, and some people may think we're not being aggressive enough. There is a balance there. What we're trying to land on is an appropriate budget where we are not coming back trying to reduce even further expenses to match our budgeted revenues. So it is a fine line, and I appreciate Anna and all the work she's doing and all the research, and I feel confident we're moving in the right direction. But we'll have more discussion on it, obviously, when we talk about the tentative budget as well. So if you have any questions, please let us know.
You know, if I could just quickly address, had a call with all the mayors, the county commissioners every Monday, and it was discussed in length yesterday. And we feel good about it as far as the mayors and the ones I've talked to since. That the county has received $111 million for COVID-related expenses Now, the only reason they received that is because of the population of the city, the cities that are around them, and they know that. And in talking with Commissioner Ainge today, we feel that we will be reimbursed 100% of COVID-related expenses. And David and Anna have set a really good tone right from the beginning of this to make sure that departments kept good track of expenses. And so we reviewed that again today in key staff, and we are going to be submitting from let's see,
March 1st.
March 1st to April 30th to the county. And they've actually brought in some help to process that, but we're keeping track of everything. And we expect that will be put back into this budget as well. And there'll be, there might be some adjustments made there as we go. But the money is available, and our staff has done a great job at keeping track of it in a cloud base. So thank you. All right, any other questions for Hannah?
So we all need to log off of this one and re-log on to a different Zoom meeting. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
In the
Okay.
same email, and we'll stand adjourned, and I'll see you back here in just a minute.